the largest percentage of the U.S. population lives in suburbs. So let's talk about them. And as we know, Indianapolis has been suburbanizing. So in the 70s, we can see where new home construction was, so overwhelmingly in Marion County and inside 465. But by the 1990s, you can see how overwhelmingly it's outside 465. And so it really showcases the new home construction that's happened since the 1990s. And more recently, even more suburbanization as we continue to go even farther outside of the central business district. And so we can see where Indianapolis, metropolitan Indianapolis' population has been expanding. It's been increasing, and it's been going outward in a very noticeable pattern, very predictable pattern called sprawl. So the sprawl and suburbia are often synonymous. They often go hand in hand. And so in this image here, we have the red dot being the inner city area, and these blue dots are suburban areas that pop up. Where they pop up? Conveniently on transportation networks, interstates for the most part. And so it gets this pattern in which you don't have development occurring just outside, slowly going outward from that red inner city area. Instead, the growth, the development is happening farther and farther outward. And so it's essentially the development of housing that's not contiguous already or next to the built-up area. What it is it's new development way farther away. Much, with what they call the leapfrog development, in which it's jumping over certain areas and going more often than not to strategic locations, i.e. where interstates come together, where 465 meets with another interstate. Often you see development there. And so there we have a key term called sprawl, which is essentially, like I said, the development of new areas, suburban areas, that aren't next to or building outward from just, kind of going slowly outward. Nope, it just expands outward by jumping over nearby areas. And we can see sprawl here. We can see suburban sprawl, larger lots. We can see how it sprawls outward. And so we don't have really a contiguous development. It just kind of goes outward, just has the name sprawl. It kind of sprawls everywhere. It kind of goes in every which direction. So even in Arizona, where this is where this image is from, we can see sprawl. This is very characteristic all throughout the country, especially in Indianapolis, where we see suburban areas growing in all sides of the city. And here's sprawl in LA. Now, suburbanization, a relatively new phenomenon since essentially World War II. So let's talk about the history. So we got to start off what happened before suburbanization. So essentially before World War II. So anywhere from, let's say, 1850 to 1945. Why 1850? Industrial Revolution, when we start moving to cities in large numbers. Key to understanding is, as I showcased with the concentric ring model, and even a little bit in the sector model, what happens is you have the role of technology, the role of transportation technology, kind of preventing you from growing in different areas. And so because rail was what dominated in these early land use models, people couldn't really live far away from a central business district. And so suburban areas didn't really exist because people had to be tied to a rail network. Now, over time, the automobile comes and it becomes more available, but still was a luxury item. And like I've mentioned before, these are those bedroom communities that were essentially the precursors, or what was there before the suburban areas started to grow all around it. And like I've mentioned before, the bedroom communities is all, as the name implies, all a retreat from the chaotic hustle and bustle in the city. Actually, during World War II is when things started to change and suburbia first began. And it actually has to do with military bases. And so in the United States during World War II, we quickly had to move soldiers around as we were preparing for different battles and wars and conquests and all of that during World War II. So essentially we had to move soldiers into places quite quickly. So we had to get good at building essentially manufactured housing. We had to build residential areas for families of military soldiers who are getting ready to be shipped to Europe or Pacific. So essentially what happened is we got really, really good at building residential areas extremely quickly. So, craftsmanship, was it of concern? Not so much. It was more, let's get some structures up so people can live. And so these two brothers, the Levitt brothers, got kind of good at building these residential areas on military bases for the soldiers. So essentially what happened was when they came back after World War II, these Levitt brothers, these guys, built these first early subdivisions, these first early examples of suburban areas, which we see here. And guess what they named it? Levittown. And so, of course, narcissistic, selfie type of individuals have always existed. So these were these names to these early mass-produced neighborhoods in New York and Pennsylvania, constructed after World War II. Some characteristics about them is these were the first examples of mass production of housing. Beforehand, a builder just works on one house and they spend a lot of time on it, and it's really well built. For example, see the homes in Speedway or Irvington, very well built homes. But then you look at these homes. I mean, they're not as well built. But talking about this, let's make a bunch of it, mass production, and we see that here. And so some examples. And so what this was is this, provided new housing for middle class and even some lower income individuals, more working class, let's say. And so what they were is they had a catalog. And so you would get a catalog and you would see 6 or 7 homes. And so essentially you had a few styles to choose from. And you just picked them. How very typical of mass production. You only get one color and you're going to like it. In the case of these houses, you're only going to get 6 different types and you're going to like it. So what that meant, though, is economies of scale. They could make more and more efficient and save money and all of that. And so it's kind of bizarre. I don't know. No one really looks at Sears catalogs anymore. But essentially what they were, people could pick out their homes among the list of 6 or 7 from a catalog, and then that's the home they would eventually choose. They got so quick, they got so good, they were building at times 30 homes each day. So you can see how this mass production happened quite quickly of these suburban homes in which entire areas were quickly covered with these low-density housing. So we understand we got the first idea as far as we were good at building these technologies. We started these new homes. We could mass produce a ton of homes quite quickly. But before that, you need people. So key to understanding mass suburbanization that happened after World War II is we had returning vets, returning GIs. So if you've been gone for 4 or 5 years and you're a soldier and you're a heterosexual male, you're going to say, all right, let's make some babies. You've been away for 4 or 5 years from the opposite sex. And so then, of course, we have the baby boom. So we had the returning veterans and, of course, quickly having families, quickly getting married and all of that. So essentially, they needed housing. And so there was now demand for housing as these GIs, as these returning veterans, started families and needed places to live. And of course, these mass-produced suburban homes were perfect for that, for this huge number of veterans returning and then starting families. Another key thing is the fact there was pent-up demand for housing. So essentially, we had the 1920s, the Roaring '20s. We were building new homes. Then came the 1930s, the Great Depression, where we weren't building hardly a thing for obvious reasons. It's depression. Then came World War II, 1940 to 1945-ish. So then you essentially have conflict. So you had several years, nearly 15 to 20 year period of no new home construction. And so there's pent-up demand. As you have all these veterans coming back, new families, but also you had no new housing really for 15 years, then this is going to add even more fuel, or actually increase even more the demand for housing and the demand for mass-produced homes. Who won World War II? We did, the United States, and all of our allies and our good buddies. And so what kind of came out of that was the fact we became the world's global superpower. I guess the Soviets would disagree with that, but economically, we definitely became the global economic superpower. And so what that meant was we had more people in our country who could afford more stuff, more people with disposable income. We had more people, more companies coming up with new inventions, companies coming up with better cars, faster cars, cooler-looking cars. All of this economic boom, even added more to the growth of suburban areas. And so people essentially could afford new homes, could afford new things, such as cars. And so this is where we see a huge increase in the amount of people who own a car. And so in the 1950s and 1960s, a lot of people, that's, all the car collector people, all the older people, the older generation, that's what they would say is the golden era of cars. And so essentially new companies, Ford, GM, cranking out new cars. We could do that. We could afford that. We could, afford the research and design and new technologies. because we're the economic superpower. And so subsequently, more and more people with cars meant more and more people could live farther away from a downtown job, could live farther away. And so now we start once again seeing that multiple nuclei idea starting to work. And then, of course, what it then morphed into the urban realms model, in which people now can freely live in their own little side of the city. If they ever needed to go to the other side, yep, they got the car, they can easily do that. Now you have your car, you need a place to drive in. So essentially the building of, or the construction of a freeway network, better highways, wider lanes, allowed people even farther distances they could travel from workplace to home, or from as they were just freely driving around an urban area. And so you could live much freer. You weren't tied to public transportation. You weren't tied because of distance. Now you can live freely wherever you want because of the automobile ownership, but also because of the networks, the freeways, the interstates. So before suburbs, people couldn't live far away from their workplace. They couldn't live, an hour and a half commute like these people in California do every day, which I couldn't imagine. So essentially, we look at railroads, streetcars, commuter trains, subways. All of them are good, but as far as being able to live farther out in the suburbs, interstates, in your own vehicle, with you behind the wheel, or you carpooling, or you texting and driving, you can then essentially move farther away from the downtown. And a lot of this was fueled by government legislation. So we had the 1956 Federal Highway Act, in which Eisenhower started the United States interstate system, and that's all the red lines you see on this particular map. And essentially, those are the interstates that allow us freely to go from one city to the next, but also within our own cities, allow us even easier access from one place to another. And so once again, it adds more to suburbanization when people can live farther distances away from a workplace and the downtown amenities and all the various attractions found throughout various urban realms in a city. More recently, since the 1980s, a new pattern has emerged. And so we have originally, we've got bedroom communities, and then over time they become mass suburbanized areas. So you have all these people. What's going to eventually follow the people? Jobs. And so I've already talked about how you've had that out-migration of jobs, what we referred to as the spatial mismatch idea, in which jobs are increasingly leaving the inner city areas and going out to the suburban areas. And so essentially jobs have followed the workers out to the suburbs. Originally it was just retail, places to get your hair cut, places to go to the grocery store. But increasingly what's happening is you're seeing more office and industry pop up in suburban areas. And a lot of them are high-tech industries, for example, who are attracted to suburban population. We're going to have, on average, people with higher incomes, but also higher education levels. And so it makes sense that high-tech companies are also going to want to locate out there where you have a larger pool of workers. And so what's happening is the suburban areas no longer are they bedroom communities. A lot of them have become edge cities. And to be an edge city, you have to have a concentration of offices and retail outside of a major central business district. And so you have to have a large number of jobs, almost equal to the number of residents that you have in a city. There's a nice formula. I don't know the formula exactly, but the moral to the story is edge cities, you need a whole lot of jobs, also along with a whole lot of residents. And so in Indiana, we only have one edge city, and that's Carmel. Carmel is where you're seeing an increasingly higher number of jobs being relocated to there, and you're seeing office complexes being added. They're essentially creating a downtown out of nowhere up in Carmel. You see a lot of office parks kind of on the outskirts of 465 in that area. And so essentially what's happening there is it's becoming an edge city where an increasingly larger number of jobs are moving out there. So once again, an edge city is where you have a large number of jobs and residents in a particular area. And so we have a general trend that's occurred. We've got these bedroom communities, which was kind of the origin. Then we have World War II. And then after World War II, we have mass urbanization and continues still to this day, but all across the country. And just in one spot in Indiana, you're seeing now the creation or the transformation from suburban areas being just plain old suburban areas, residential, to now edge cities in which they have more jobs located there. Will that trend continue? We'll see. And so that's one of the things to continue to look at in the next 10 to 15 years. Now here's my interpretation of metropolitan Indianapolis, which once again is just Marion County and the 9 surrounding counties, and I have the key suburban areas and urban areas and all of that shown here. But you can really see from this a kind of particular pattern as far as the suburban areas that are growing. A lot of them where they pop up right next to interstates. And so this once again further underscores the idea as far as the role of interstates and automobiles for allowing people to live farther away from the central business district. Now I'm doing a case study of Fishers, Indiana. So this is using the Hamilton County GIS database, once again showcasing an example of jobs in geography. And so we're going to look at historical aerial photographs. So this first one here is in 1936, and you can see Fishers is nothing but a farming community. And so was it a bedroom community? Perhaps. It could have been, but it was pretty far away from the downtown. But if you look on the previous map, I mean, Fishers really isn't that far from Marion County. In fact, it usually borders it. And so here what we're going to do is just look at aerial photographs to see how this area has transitioned before World War II and then more recently into a mass suburbanized area. By 1956, we can see the early laying down or the early origins of Interstate 69. So it's that white line that kind of goes right through the middle of the page from the bottom and then up to the top and has a little bit of a bend to the left in it. That white line in the previous map wasn't there, and so this is Interstate 69. And so once again, I'm going to showcase how highways play a critical role, especially where highways have exits as far as the development of a particular area. And so Fishers, a super tiny small town back in 1956, but once again, that was right before we had the completion of Interstate 69, which is now complete and now shown there in 1962. And so we can see Fishers, it's still quite rural, still not much happening there, a little bit of development, but still a very, very small town. Now by 1976, you can see the construction of these interstates, and I-69 gets a little bit widened, and so it essentially becomes even freer flowing. So they made the interstate even better. And so what you start noticing is you start seeing these little pockets start popping up of little homes. And keep in mind, this is 1976. So this is well after World War II, but slowly you're starting to see suburbanization happen here. And here it is by the 1980s. You can see these subdivisions that have their very distinctive patterns up in the upper left-hand corner, to kind of the curvilinear streets that curve, which is very characteristic of suburban neighborhoods, essentially like one way in, one way out. Whereas in the older historical neighborhoods, they're nice grid pattern. See throughout much of Indianapolis how it's just a big grid pattern. There's not a lot of these curvy streets like you see up in suburban areas. But here's 1985, the aerial photograph, and you still see a lot of farmland. And so that farmland is undeveloped land in which people are just waiting to sell. They're waiting to sell because they can make them a whole lot of money, especially younger farmers. What happens, you see more and more of his younger farmers, whether grandpa or their dad might have ran the farm, they're saying, what the hell with it. I can sell this and I can retire at the age of 35 and live in Key West, Florida the rest of my life. That ain't a bad gig at all. And so that's kind of one of the things you also have to consider is how these little plots, these little farm areas are kind of sold here and there in parts and parcels, and so that kind of is why you see a pattern in which it's not really contagious growth kind of happening outward. It's just kind of happening piecemeal in one spot here and one spot there, very scattered. And just 13 years later, boom! By the late 1990s, you can see Fishers has grown considerably. And so if we go back in time, there used to be a Fishers High School, and then it closed and shut down. It kind of merged with what they called Hamilton Southeastern, and now we have this huge boom in the population here. Guess what's back? Fishers High School is back. So now there's 2 high schools in this particular area. Even talked about a 3rd one down the road. So this really showcases how the mass suburbanization, how it happens quite quickly. But in the case of this particular area, Hamilton County, one of the fastest growing counties in the country, we can see how this mass suburbanization really didn't kickstart until the 1990s. But nonetheless, a lot of those same underlying factors led to the suburbanization movement, which we can see quite evident here. And more recently, here's the 2014, you're seeing more businesses start to also locate in Fishers. So locating especially there on the interstate where we have that exit there off of 69. So you're seeing more businesses now locating here as well. A lot of them are retail, but you're seeing more offices, for example, hospitals, and immediate care facilities that are also popping up from the increased demand for their services.